In the mid-14th century, a silent killer swept across Europe. The Black Death, as it came to be known, was one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. It struck fear into the hearts of millions. The plague arrived without warning, spreading rapidly from town to town. People fell ill suddenly and died within days. Entire families were wiped out, villages left empty. The scale of death was unlike anything seen before. The Black Death got its name from the dark spots that appeared on victims' skin, caused by internal bleeding. The sight was terrifying to those who witnessed it. This essay will explore the devastating impact of the Black Death. We'll look at how it started, spread, and changed society forever. Through it all, we'll uncover the human stories of those who lived and died during this terrible time. The Black Death didn't start in Europe. Most historians believe it originated in Central Asia, traveling along the Silk Road. Merchants and travelers unknowingly carried the disease with them. The plague reached the Crimean port of Kaffa in 1347. Italian merchant ships docked there regularly, becoming the vehicles that brought the plague to Europe. Rats on board carried infected fleas, the real culprits in spreading the disease. The first European outbreak occurred in Sicily in October 1347. From there, the plague spread rapidly along trade routes and waterways. By 1348, it had reached France and England, engulfing most of Europe. The speed at which the plague spread was terrifying, moving up to 8 kilometers per day over land. Within just a few years, it had reached as far as Iceland and Greenland. The world seemed to shrink as the plague connected distant lands in shared suffering.
The death toll from the Black Death was staggering. It's estimated that 30 to 60% of Europe's population died. Entire villages were wiped out. Cities lost half their inhabitants or more. Accurate numbers are hard to come by, but some figures give us an idea of the devastation. Florence, Italy lost 50,000 people in just 4 months. Paris buried 800 people a day at the height of the outbreak. In London, mass graves were dug to handle the overwhelming number of dead. The plague didn't just affect Europe, it spread to North Africa and the Middle East as well. Some estimates suggest that the global population fell from 450 million to 350 million. The massive loss of life had far-reaching consequences, leading to labor shortages and economic changes. The power structure of society was altered, and the church's influence waned as people lost faith. The world that emerged after the plague was very different from the one that came before.
The symptoms of the Black Death were horrifying. The most common form was bubonic plague, causing painful swellings called buboes. These appeared in the armpits, neck and groin, turning black and giving the disease its name. Other symptoms included high fever, chills, muscle cramps and seizures. Many coughed up blood, and in some cases the skin turned black and rotted while the person was still alive. Death usually came within 2 to 7 days of the first symptoms appearing. There were 2 other forms of the plague, both even deadlier, pneumonic and septicemic. Pneumonic plague infected the lungs and could be spread through the air. Septicemic plague infected the blood, killing almost 100% of those infected. Death could come within hours of the first symptoms. The suffering caused by the plague was immense, with victims often abandoned by their families out of fear. Many died alone, without comfort or care. The sight and smell of rotting bodies filled the streets. The constant presence of death took a heavy psychological toll.
Section 5. Medieval medicine, futile attempts at treatment. Medieval doctors were helpless against the Black Death. They had no understanding of germs or how diseases spread. Their treatments were based on superstition and outdated theories. Most of these did nothing to help. Some even made things worse. One common belief was that bad smells caused disease. Doctors would carry herbs and flowers to ward off the plague. Some wore beak-like masks filled with sweet-smelling substances, giving a false sense of security. Other treatments were more harmful, like bloodletting, which weakened patients. Some doctors recommended unusual cures like drinking vinegar or eating crushed emeralds. None of these had any effect on the disease. In desperation, people turned to magic and superstition, with amulets and charms becoming popular. Prayer was seen as the only real hope for many. The failure of medicine during the Black Death had long-lasting effects, shaking people's faith in traditional authorities. In the long run, it led to advances in medical knowledge as people began to question old ideas and look for new explanations.
Section 6. Social upheaval, a world turned upside down. The Black Death turned society upside down, collapsing traditional social structures. With so many dead, survivors found themselves in a new world where old rules no longer applied. This led to both chaos and opportunity. Workers were in high demand and could demand higher wages and better conditions. This shift in power angered the ruling classes, who passed laws to try to keep wages low. Family structures were disrupted, with many children left orphaned. Blended families became more common. Women took on roles traditionally held by men, showing their capabilities. The Black Death reshaped society in profound ways.
Section 7. Economic consequences. The collapse of feudalism. The Black Death had profound economic consequences, accelerating the decline of feudalism in Europe. Under feudalism, peasants worked the land for noble landowners, but the plague disrupted this system. The shortage of workers gave peasants more bargaining power. They could demand better conditions and even refuse to work. Some left the land altogether to seek better opportunities in cities. Landowners struggled to keep their estates productive, often offering better terms to attract workers. This weakened the power of the nobility. The plague also led to changes in agriculture, with many landowners switching to raising sheep for wool. This required less labor, but also displaced many peasants, contributing to the growth of a money economy. Another economic effect was the redistribution of wealth, with property inherited by survivors. The rigid class structure of medieval society became more fluid.
Section 8. Religious turmoil, faith tested in dark times. The Black Death shook people's faith to its core. The church was the center of medieval life, but it seemed powerless against the plague. This led many to question their beliefs. Some saw the plague as God's punishment for sin, while others lost faith entirely. The church itself was hit hard by the plague, with many priests and monks dying while caring for the sick. Less educated priests were rushed into service, leading to a decline in the quality of religious leadership. The plague also gave rise to extreme religious movements like the Flagellants. In the long term, the Black Death weakened the power of the Catholic Church, contributing to the rise of reform movements. Section 9. Scapegoats and persecution, the blame game. In times of crisis, people often look for someone to blame, and the Black Death was no exception. Various groups were targeted as scapegoats, with the most widespread persecution against Jews. They were accused of poisoning wells to spread the disease, leading to terrible violence and massacres. In many cities, Jewish communities were attacked, with some burned alive and others forced to convert or leave. Entire Jewish populations were wiped out. The Pope spoke out against these persecutions, but his words had little effect. Other groups were also targeted, like lepers and foreigners. The scapegoating during the Black Death had long-lasting effects, reinforcing existing prejudices. It led to the expulsion of Jews from many parts of Europe, changing the cultural and economic landscape. The plague showed how easily fear can turn to hatred. It's a lesson that remains relevant today. Section 10. Artistic expressions, death in culture. The Black Death left a deep mark on European culture, influencing art, literature, and popular customs. The theme of death became much more prominent, reflecting the trauma that society had experienced. In art, the dance of death became a popular motif, showing people of all social classes dancing with skeletons. Literature also reflected the impact of the plague, with Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron being a famous example. The plague also influenced religious art, with images of the Last Judgment becoming more common. These reflected people's increased concern with the afterlife. The plague had made death a very real and immediate presence in people's lives. It showed a new awareness of life's fragility. Section 11. Legacy of the Plague, shaping the modern world. The Black Death was more than just a terrible tragedy. It was a turning point in history. Its effects shaped the world we live in today, marking the end of the medieval world and paving the way for the Renaissance and the modern era. One lasting impact was on medicine and science, with the failure of traditional remedies leading to new approaches. People began to question old authorities, contributing to the growth of scientific thinking. The economic changes caused by the plague had far-reaching effects leading to the decline of feudalism and the rise of a money economy. The plague also contributed to urbanization, with cities growing in importance. Perhaps most importantly, the Black Death changed how people thought about life and death, leading to a new focus on making the most of life. The idea that life is precious and should be lived fully gained strength.